The Malthari war-cruiser Eclipse of Dawn hung in the void like a shard of frozen lightning, its hull a seamless fusion of crystalline silver and flowing organic alloys that pulsed with veins of purple-white energy. The ship was a masterpiece of their civilization, elegant, precise, and utterly lethal. From the observation deck, High Commander Malvar watched the distant blue-green speck of Earth with a mixture of amusement and disdain. This is what the lesser species fear. The human homeworld was unremarkable by galactic standards. No towering atmospheric condensers, no aurora, lit megastructures, just the flicker of primitive cities and the occasional flare of chemical propulsion. The Malthari had seen 1,000 such worlds before, and they had all fallen. "Status report," Malvar commanded, his voice a low hum that resonated through the bioluminescent panels of the bridge. Thalolan, his chief scientist, manipulated a holographic display with delicate, elongated fingers, minimal orbital defenses. Their largest warships are barely a tenth the mass of our light escorts. Their weapons, a ripple of amusement passed through the crew, are still primarily projectile-based chemical explosives, kinetic slugs. Malvar exhaled, the sound like wind through a canyon, and their energy signatures, Thalolan's crest of translucent spines, flickered in disdain. Fission reactors, crude plasma containment, they have barely harnessed the fundamentals of quantum flux. A murmur of laughter spread through the bridge. The Malthari had expected something, some hidden strength, some overlooked innovation, but this, humanity was a joke, a species that had barely clawed its way out of its own gravity. Well, now daring to stand before the galactic order. Malvar turned his gaze back to the planet. And their military? Thalolan called up another projection, blurry images of human soldiers, their armor bulky and unrefined, their weapons laughably primitive. Their most elite warriors still rely on physical projectiles, no energy shielding, no neural augmentation. Their command structure is rigid, their tactics predictable. Malvar allowed himself a rare smirk. The humans had fought among themselves for centuries, their history a tapestry of blood and ruin. They had no unity, no discipline, and yet they had refused the Malthari's offer of assimilation. Foolish. "Prepare the fleet," he ordered. "We will demonstrate the cost of defiance." On the surface, in a dimly lit bunker beneath the European defense grid, Commander Victoria Grogan watched the Malthari fleet's approach on a flickering tactical display. The aliens had made no attempt to hide their movements. Why would they? To them, Earth was already conquered. Corporal Cameron McKay stood beside her, his jaw tight. "They're not even bothering with stealth." Grogan didn't answer. She had seen the reports, the Malthari's flowing organic warships, their weapons that could crack continents. But she had also seen something else, something the aliens had missed. The humans had been preparing for this moment for decades. Not with grand speeches or desperate pleas for mercy, but in silence. In hidden shipyards buried beneath Antarctic ice. In laboratories where scientists had worked in shifts, fueled by caffeine and sheer spite. And now, as the Malthari fleet descended, confident in their superiority, Grogan allowed herself a slow, feral smile. Let them underestimate us. The galaxy was about to learn why that was a mistake. The Malthari fleet moved through the void like a storm of living light, their ships carved from flowing silver alloys that pulsed with aurora bright energy. Commander Malvar lounged in his command throne, watching the human homeworld swell on the forward display. His crystalline fingers tapped idly against the armrest, sending ripples through the bioluminescent control surfaces. The planet was a blue-green jewel, wreathed in primitive orbital stations and flickering satellites. No energy shields, no planetary defense grids, just a scattering of outdated warships, barely more than glorified patrol craft, floating in defensive formations. Malvar exhaled through his nasal vents, the sound a dismissive hiss. This is what the High Conclave feared. Beside him, Thalolan, the fleet's chief scientist, adjusted the data streams flowing across his translucent wrist display. His violet eyes flickered with amusement. Initial scans confirm it. Their technology is decades behind even the weakest client species. Their weapons are chemical, propellant-based. Their armor is… He paused, mandibles twitching in disbelief. Steel. A ripple of laughter spread through the command deck. Malvar didn't join in. He had fought in the Purge of Keswick IV, had seen entire civilizations broken beneath Malthari might. But this wasn't war. This was pest control. Order the Dawn Razor to move ahead, he commanded. Let them see what real power looks like. The Dawn Razor, a sleek predator of a ship, glided forward, its hull shimmering like liquid mercury. Its main cannon, a spiraling construct of crystalline filaments, hummed to life, bathing the void in eerie purple-white light. On the bridge of the human vessel Resolute, alarms blared. Commander Grogan didn't flinch. She watched the Malthari ships approach with cold precision, her fingers resting lightly on the tactical console. Beside her, Corporal McKay's knuckles whitened around his rifle. "They're powering weapons," he muttered. Grogan nodded. "Of course they are." The Malthari hadn't even hailed them. No demands for surrender, no final warning, just the silent, arrogant certainty of a predator toying with prey. A flicker of movement on the display caught her eye. The Dawn Razor fired. A beam of ionized plasma lanced across the void, a weapon designed to slice through battlecruisers in a single shot. It struck the Resolute dead center and splashed. Malvar's crest of sensory spines stiffened. The human ship hadn't vaporized, hadn't even cracked. The plasma discharge had flared across its hull in a ripple of dissipating energy, leaving only a faint scorch mark. Thalolin's mandibles parted in shock. "That's impossible." Malvar leaned forward, his claws digging into the armrest. "Scan them again." The data streams twisted, recalibrating. Thalolin's voice turned hollow. "Their hull, it's not steel. It's a composite. Layered ceramics. Hyper-dense alloys. Energy dispersal matrices." Malvar's blood ran cold. That wasn't primitive armor. That was warship armor. On the view screen, the Resolute's weapons array, previously dark, flared to life. Railgun ports slid open, plasma conduits pulsed. And then, with terrifying precision, the human ship returned fire. The Malthari had made a mistake. They had assumed humanity was weak. They had assumed they understood human technology. But worst of all, they had assumed humans would fight fair. The Resolute's railgun round struck the Dawn Razor at HFY, the Malthari shields, designed to deflect energy weapons, barely registered the kinetic impact before the projectile punched clean through their hull. Alarms shrieked across the Malthari fleet. Malvar's command throne shuddered as secondary explosions rocked the Dawn Razor. Thalolin staggered, his voice a whisper. "What have we awakened?" Grogan's smile didn't reach her eyes. "Now they learn." The Dawn Razor reeled. Malvar's fingers dug into the armrests of his command throne as the impact tremors rippled through the ship's crystalline superstructure. The Malthari vessel, a masterpiece of flowing silver alloy and bioluminescent conduits, had never been struck like this before. Their shielding, designed to disperse plasma lances and particle beams, had barely registered the human weapon, because it wasn't energy, it was mass. A chunk of tungsten the size of a ground vehicle, accelerated to near-light speed, had just torn through 3 decks like a meteor through wet paper. Atmosphere vented in shimmering purple plumes as emergency bulkheads slammed shut, their translucent aerogel surfaces flickering with containment warnings. Thalolin's voice was barely audible over the klaxons. Shields at HFY, hull breaches on decks 7 through 9, primary power conduits severed. Malvar's crest of sensory spines flattened against his skull. This wasn't supposed to happen. Human ships were supposed to be fragile things. Thin, skinned, slow, reliant on crude fusion drives and chemical explosives. But the Resolute moved like a predator on the view screen. The human vessel pivoted with eerie precision, its angular black hull swallowing starlight. The Malthari had dismissed it as primitive, a blocky relic of an unrefined species. Now, Malvar saw the truth. Every line was deliberate. Every angle was armor, and it was fast. The Resolute's engines flared. Not the graceful, ionized arcs of Malthari drives, but a brutal thrust of superheated plasma, raw and unapologetic. The ship accelerated toward the Dawn Razor's flank, railgun port cycling for another shot. Malvar barked orders. Evasive pattern, Zeta. All batteries, fire at will. The Malthari fleet responded in unison. A storm of violet, white lances streaked toward the human ship, their energy signatures distorting space as they closed in. Thalolan's claws twitched over the sensor display, waiting for the inevitable bloom of a dying reactor. But the Resolute didn't burn, it shrugged. The plasma impacts splashed across its hull like rain against stone, dissipating in fractal patterns of dispersed heat. Thalolan's breath caught. Their armor, it's not just absorbing the energy, it's redirecting it, channeling it. Malvar's throat tightened. Human ships weren't supposed to have shielding like that. They weren't supposed to think like that. But the Resolute wasn't just a ship. It was a message. Aboard the human vessel, Commander Victoria Grogan watched the Malthari flounder. Her lips curled, not in triumph, not in vengeance, in recognition. The aliens had assumed humans fought like animals, wild, desperate, clawing for survival. And they weren't entirely wrong, but they had missed the other truth. Humans didn't just fight to survive, they fought to win. Grogan turned to Corporal McKay, who stood at the tactical station, fingers dancing across the holographic interface. His eyes were locked on the Malthari flagship, calculating trajectories, weaknesses, kill zones. They're adjusting formation, he murmured, trying to encircle us. Grogan nodded. Let them. The Malthari were apex predators in their own right. Elegant, efficient, masters of energy-based warfare. But they had never faced something like humanity. Something that learned, something that adapted, something that remembered. The Resolute's railguns hummed as they charged again. The first whisper of thunder had been fired. Now came the storm, the Malthari flagship. Eclipse of dawn, hung in the void like a shard of frozen lightning. Its hull, a seamless fusion of crystalline silver and flowing aurora hues. Its weapon arrays, pulsing with the slow, rhythmic glow of a predator circling prey. High Commander Malvar watched the human vessel through the holographic display, his talons flexing against the command dais. The Resolute was a blunt, angular thing compared to the Malthari's organic elegance. Its armor scorched but unbroken, its weapons still live. A grave mistake, he had dismissed them. They were supposed to be weak. Thalolan, his chief scientist, stood at his side, her bioluminescent filaments flickering in agitation. Their armor, she murmured, her voice a whisper of ionized air. It shouldn't have held. Our lances cut through reinforced battleplate like vapor. That ship is still standing, Malvar finished. His mandibles tightened. The humans had no right to be this resilient. Their technology was crude, their tactics brutish. And yet, the Resolute moved, not with the graceful arcs of Malthari maneuvering, but in sharp, brutal vectors, like a blade being drawn back for another strike. Malvar's secondary eyes tracked the shift. The human commander, Grogan, was repositioning, letting the Malthari encirclement tighten, letting them, a cold ripple passed through his neural tendrils. That was not the behavior of prey. Aboard the Resolute, Commander Victoria, Grogan exhaled slowly, her fingers resting on the tactical display. The Malthari were beautiful killers, their ships weaving through space like living things, their weapons singing with violet, white fury, and they had no idea what was coming. McKay, she said, her voice steady. Status on the railgun recharge. Corporal Cameron McKay didn't look up from his console. His hands moved with the precision of a surgeon or a sniper. 90 seconds, Commander. They're adjusting their shield harmonics. trying to compensate for the last hit. Grogan's lips curled. The Malthari had seen the railgun fire once. They thought they understood it. They thought they could adapt. But human weapons weren't like theirs. Malthari energy lances were elegant, precise scalpels in the dark. Human railguns were hammers, and hammers didn't need finesse. "Time to show them what happens," Grogan murmured. "When they underestimate us." Thalolan's sensors screamed. The human ship's energy signature spiked, not in the controlled surges of Malthari technology, but in a raw, jagged wave that scorched the scanners. "High Commander," Malvar saw it too. The Resolute's forward batteries weren't just charging. They were overcharging, a human flaw, a desperation move. The realization struck him like a plasma bolt. They wanted the heat bleed. They wanted the energy wash. Because the Malthari sensors, so finely tuned to the harmonics of their own weapons, were blinding themselves trying to parse the chaotic feedback. And in that moment of distortion, the Resolute fired. Not one railgun, all of them. The projectiles tore through space, not as clean, luminous lances, but as dark, shuddering lines of force, each one a sliver of tungsten accelerated to a fraction of light speed. The Malthari shields flared, their adaptive matrices scrambling to disperse the impact. But human kinetics didn't disrupt, they shattered. The Eclipse of Dawn's starboard shield collapsed like glass under a bullet. Malvar staggered as the deck lurched, his neural link screaming with damage reports. Across the bridge, Malthari crew hissed in shock, their luminous skin flickering in distress. Thalolan's voice was hollow. They broke it. Not bypassed, not overloaded. Humans didn't dance around problems. They punched through them. Grogan watched the Malthari flagship reel, its pristine hull now marred by the brutal kiss of human artillery. McKay let out a low whistle. Damn, that actually worked. Grogan didn't smile. This wasn't over. The Malthari were predators, and predators didn't flee after one wound. They learned, just like humanity had. "Reload," she ordered. "They'll come harder next time." The Resolute's engines growled in response. The gauntlet had been thrown. Now, the galaxy would see who could pick it up. Section Fae. The Trap Springs, the Malthari flagship Eclipse of Dawn hung in the void. Its once gleaming organic hull now scarred by the brutal geometry of human weaponry. The wound pulsed with erratic discharges of purple, white energy, like a living thing bleeding light. Malvar's talons flexed against the command dais, his neural link still humming with the aftershocks of the strike. The pain was secondary. The insult burned deeper. Primitives. They had dared. Across the bridge, Thalolan's bioluminescent skin rippled in agitation, his silver-veined fingers dancing across the holographic displays. The data streams reflected in his wide pupil, less eyes, calculations, damage reports, the cold mathematics of failure. Shield harmonics were perfect, Thalolan murmured, more to himself than to Malvar. Theoretically, they shouldn't have been able to. Ina. Malvar's voice was a blade of ice. Thalolan flinched. Malvar didn't need theory. He needed blood, his gaze locked onto the human vessel, resolute. Their crude translation matrices called it. A blocky, angular monstrosity of blackened alloy and exposed weapon mounts. No elegance, no artistry, just sheer, brutal function. It had hurt them. Malvar's mandibles twitched. A predator's instinct stirred in his gut. Humans fought like cornered beasts, but cornered beasts were predictable. He would show them the difference between desperation and dominance. Aboard the Resolute, Commander Victoria Grogan watched the Malthari flagship through the tactical display. The alien vessel had gone eerily still, its streaming energy currents dimming to a low, ominous pulse. Not running, McKay muttered beside her, his fingers tightening around the grip of his rifle. That's bad, right? Grogan didn't answer. Her eyes traced the Malthari ship's movements, too deliberate, too controlled. Predators didn't retreat after a single wound. They circled, they adapted, and then she saw it. A ripple across the eclipse of dawn's crystalline hull, subtle, almost beautiful, like the first shimmer of heat before a wildfire. "Brace," Grogan said softly. The Malthari ship unfolded. Thalolan had never seen Malvar like this. The commander stood motionless at the heart of the bridge, his neural link flaring with command overrides. The eclipse of dawn responded like a living extension of his will. Across its surface, panels of translucent alloy shifted, peeling back to reveal the hidden geometries beneath. Bioluminescent conduits pulsed brighter, feeding power into something new. Thalolan's breath caught. They were activating the Aurora Lance. A weapon meant for fleets, for worlds, not for a single pathetic human ship. Malvar's voice was a whisper. "Burn them," Space screamed. A beam of pure violet, white energy lanced from the Malthari flagship, so bright it left afterimages seared into retinas. It tore through the void, a river of annihilation aimed straight at the Resolute. Grogan's hands clenched. The Resolute's shields flared and failed in the same instant. The beam struck home, for a heartbeat. The human ship was bathed in killing light, its silhouette dissolving in the glare. Malvar allowed himself a moment of satisfaction. The light fractured. Thalolan's sensors screamed in dissonance. The Resolute wasn't gone. Scattering. Thalolan breathed. The human ship had shattered, not into debris, but into pieces, each fragment spinning away under controlled thrust, and at its core, something new emerged. A smaller vessel, sleeker, angrier. Grogan's voice crackled over the Resolute's remains. The trap sprang. Malvar had a single, frozen moment to realize his mistake. The humans hadn't just taken the hit. They'd used it. The Resolute was never the real ship. It was the bait. And now the hunter was the hunted. The last thing he saw was the human warship's true form, a blade of blackened steel, unleashing hell. The Malthari bridge flickered in the aftermath, the aurora, light glow of their consoles dimming, as if in mourning. Malvar's claws dug into the command throne's crystalline armrests, the smooth material groaning under the pressure. His secondary eyelids flicked sideways in rapid pulses, a reflex he hadn't needed since his first battle centuries ago. The human ship wasn't just alive, it had changed. The Resolute's outer hull had disintegrated under the Dawnbreaker's main cannon, but not into wreckage, into components. Like a serpent shedding its skin, the false warship had split apart, revealing the sleek, angular predator coiled within. The new vessel was smaller, darker, its armor, not the gleaming alloy of the decoy, but a matte black composite that drank in the light. The Malthari scanners struggled to lock onto it, their purple, white energy pulses sliding off its surface like water over oil. Thalolan's voice was a whisper, barely audible over the thrum of the ship's failing stabilizers. "They let us hit them." Malvar didn't need the scientist to confirm it. The realization was already a cold knife in his gut. The humans had engineered their own destruction, or rather, the destruction of the mask they'd worn. The Resolute had been a shell, a hollow giant meant to draw their fire, to make the Malthari confident. And now the real ship, smaller, faster, deadlier, was unfolding into the void, like a blade unsheathed. On the view screen, the blackened human vessel rotated, its thrusters flaring crimson. No elegant ionization trails, no flowing energy signatures, just raw, brutal acceleration. It was coming. Aboard the Revenant, the name stenciled hastily on the inner hull where the crew had scratched out Resolute. Commander Grogan exhaled. The impact had rattled them, even through the dampeners. The bridge lights flickered, casting jagged shadows across the faces of her crew. Corporal McKay wiped blood from his split lip, grinning. "Hell of a way to say hello, Mom." Grogan didn't answer. Her eyes were locked on the tactical display. The Malthari ship hung there, its elegant flowing silhouette now marred by the jagged afterglow of its own weapon's discharge. It had taken the bait, now it was time to show them why humanity had survived its own wars. All systems, nominal. came the reply. Decoy hull dispersal complete. Primary armor at FA, rail capacitors charging. She nodded. Then let's not keep them waiting. The Malthari had expected a wounded beast. What they got was a ghost. The Revenant moved like nothing in their tactical databases. No graceful arcs, no sweeping maneuvers. It jerked. Thrusters fired in abrupt, staccato bursts, sending the ship lurching sideways, then down, then into a spiraling roll that made their targeting systems scream in protest. And then it fired. Not with the elegant plasma lances or the harmonic disruptors. The Malthari favored. With railguns, the projectiles struck before the sound of their firing could even register. Hypersonic slugs of tungsten and depleted uranium, accelerated to a fraction of light speed. The first volley punched straight through the Dawnbreaker's forward shields, the energy barriers flaring violet before collapsing like shattered glass. The second volley cratered the hull, the metal screaming as it deformed under impacts that carried the kinetic force of small asteroids. Malvar's ship shuddered. For the first time in his long life, he felt fear. Not the clean, sharp fear of battle, but something deeper, something primal. The humans weren't just fighting, they were hunting. Thololan's hands trembled over the sensor array. The readings made no sense. The human ship's energy signature was chaotic, fluctuating wildly as if it didn't care about efficiency or elegance. It burned fuel like a dying star, wasting energy on maneuvers that should have been impossible. Every erratic twist, every reckless burst of speed, every seemingly wasted shot was calculated. The humans weren't following the rules of war as the Malthari understood them. They were rewriting them mid-battle. Then the comms crackled. A human voice, Grogan's, cut through the interference. "You thought we were weak because we don't shine like you do. But darkness has teeth too." The Revenant surged forward, and the void howled. The Revenant cut through the void like a blade through silk, its engines roaring with a fury that defied the elegant, flowing physics of Malthari propulsion. Where their ships glided on streams of ionized aurora light, the human vessel thrashed forward, its thrusters burning white, hot, its hull groaning under the strain of maneuvers no Malthari pilot would dare attempt. Malvar watched from the command spire of the Eclipse Dawn, his crystalline fingers tightening around the railing. The data streams flickering across the holographic displays told a story his mind refused to accept. This was not war, this was butchery. The human ship had no regard for formation, no respect for the sacred geometries of fleet engagement. It twisted, rolled, and lunged, firing not in disciplined volleys, but in savage, unpredictable bursts. Its weapons were crude by Malthari standards, no elegant beams of condensed plasma, no harmonic resonance lances. Just metal, hurled at obscene velocities, punching through shields like fists through glass. And then there were the missiles. Thololan's voice crackled over the command channel, strained with disbelief. "High Commander, they're projectiles. They change course mid-flight." Malvar's crest flared in alarm. Impossible. No guidance system is that precise. Yet the evidence burned across the tactical display. The human munitions adjusted, weaving through the Malthari point, defense grid like living things. Some detonated early, scattering shrapnel that carved glowing scars across the Dawn's pristine hull. Others waited, slipping past shields before erupting in blossoms of fire that sent tremors through the ship's organic superstructure. A new signal, something smaller streaking toward them. Thololan's breath hitched. Boarding pods. Malvar's blood ran cold. Boarding actions were a relic of ancient wars, abandoned by civilized species as too barbaric, too personal. The Malthari had not fought ship to ship in centuries. Their warriors were scholars, their battles waged at a distance, with honor and precision. But the humans, they came closer. The pods hit like meteor strikes, slamming into the Dawn's hull with enough force to buckle the aerogel plating. Magnetic clamps hissed as they locked on. And then, the cutting began. Thermal torches burned through the crystalline layers, carving jagged entry points in seconds. Alarms wailed as atmosphere vented in shrieking gusts. And then, they emerged. Not soldiers, clad in matte black armor that drank in the light, their visors glowing like the eyes of nocturnal hunters. The humans moved with a terrifying fluid efficiency. Their weapons were simple, kinetic rifles, blades, explosives, but they wielded them with a brutality that turned the Dawn's corridors into slaughterhouses. Malvar's warriors fought. They had trained for this. In theory, but theory meant nothing when faced with creatures who fought dirty, who shot out light panels to drown hallways in darkness, who used the ship's own ventilation systems to flood compartments with choking smoke, who smiled behind their helmets as they closed in. One of them, taller than the rest, her armor marked with crimson sigils, stepped over the bodies of fallen Malthari, her rifle humming with barely contained energy. Commander Victoria Grogan, she tilted her head, studying Malvar through the fractured remains of the bridge's crystalline viewport. "You thought we were weak," she said, her voice a distorted growl through the helmet's vox. "Because we don't fight like you, because we don't shine." Her gauntlet flexed. The rifle's power cell whined to full charge. But the dark? She raised the weapon. The dark bites back. Thalolan's last transmission reached the Malthari fleet just before the eclipse dawn's core detonated. A single phrase, trembling with revelation. "They are not soldiers. They are wolves." The void swallowed the light, and the Ravenant turned its gaze toward the next target. Section Fae. The Council's panic. The Malthari High Council chambers had always been a place of serene authority, a vast crystalline dome where the air shimmered with ionized currents, where decisions rippled through the galaxy like the slow, inevitable turn of celestial bodies. Now it was chaos. Thalolan's final transmission echoed through the chamber, its words carving through the assembled lords like a monomolecular blade. The holographic feed of the eclipsed dawn's destruction still flickered above the central dais, frozen in the moment before the human warship's railgun barrage had split the cruiser apart. The image was almost artistic, a bloom of purple, white energy collapsing inward, swallowed by the Black High Lord Vathar, eldest of the council, gripped the armrests of his levitating throne, his bioluminescent veins pulsing erratically. The humans should have been broken. Their ships were crude, their weapons inelegant. They fought without the flowing precision of Malthari doctrine, without the radiant discipline of a species that had mastered war as an art form. The Ravenant moved like a nightmare. It didn't gleam. It didn't announce its presence with the proud ionization trails of Malthari vessels. It hunted. Vathar's secondary eyelids flicked shut for a moment, his mind replaying the sensor logs. The human warship had emerged from the debris field of a dead moon, its matte, black hull drinking in the light. No energy signature, no thruster flare, just. Then the railguns had spoken. "Analysis," Vathar demanded, his voice a thin rasp. A younger Lord Serial stepped forward, her crystalline fingers trembling as she manipulated the holodisplay. "Their weaponry is," she hesitated. "It should not be possible." The data unfolded like a confession. The humans hadn't just matched Malthari technology, they had skewed it. Their railguns didn't fire solid slugs. They fired fracturing rounds, projectiles that split mid-trajectory into a storm of hypersonic shrapnel, bypassing energy shields by sheer saturation. Their plasma lances weren't continuous beams but pulsed, each burst tuned to resonate with Malthari shield harmonics, collapsing them in seconds. And their armor. Vathar's throat tightened. The Ravenant's outer plating wasn't metal. It was reactive. Sensor logs showed the hull shifting before impacts, dispersing energy like water parting around a stone. "They adapt," Serial whispered. "Not between battles, during them." A murmur slithered through the council. The humans had no right to such advancements. They were young, fractured. They had spent centuries butchering each other over patches of dirt while the Malthari perfected the symphony of war. Vathar's gaze drifted to the frozen image of Commander Grogan, her armored form standing amidst the wreckage of the eclipsed Dawn's bridge. Her helmet's visor was a void, reflecting nothing. That was the true horror. The Malthari had studied humanity for decades. They had seen the wars, the cruelty, the desperation. They had assumed that made them weak, but the humans had learned from their darkness. They had weaponized it. A chime echoed through the chamber. An emergency transmission from the fleet's forward scouts. The Revenant had changed course. It was coming for the Council's flagship. Vathar felt something cold and unfamiliar coil in his chest. The humans didn't fight for honor. They didn't fight for glory. They fought to win. And now, the Malthari finally understood. They were not the hunters. They were the prey. The Revenant cut through the void like a blade through silk, its dark hull drinking in the starlight. To the Malthari, it was an aberration, a ship built not for elegance, not for the flowing harmony of their crystalline fleets, but for violence. Every angle was sharp, every system redundant, every weapon positioned, not for aesthetic balance, but for maximum lethality. Malvar watched it approach through the flagship's panoramic viewport, his silver-veined fingers tightening around the command rail. The human vessel was wounded, its armor scarred from the battle at eclipsed dawn, its energy signatures fluctuating, but it did not slow. It did not hesitate. It advanced. Behind him, Thalolan's bioluminescent markings flickered in agitation, his normally composed voice strained. Their reactor signatures are unstable. They should be retreating to regroup. Why aren't they retreating? Malvar did not answer. He already knew. Humans did not retreat. Not when they had prey in their sights. Inside the Revenant, Commander Victoria Grogan stood motionless on the bridge, her armored boots magnetized to the deck. The ship's interior was dim, lit only by the blood-red glow of emergency lighting and the flickering holoscreens feeding her real-time data. The air smelled of burnt wiring and ozone, the aftermath of their last engagement. Corporal Cameron McKay adjusted the tactical display with a gloved hand, his voice steady despite the tension coiling through the crew. Malthari flagship is holding position. Their escorts are moving to intercept. Grogan didn't need to see the tactical readout to know the odds. The Revenant was outnumbered, outgunned. She exhaled, slow and deliberate, her breath fogging the inside of her helmet. They had one advantage the Malthari did not understand. Humans thrived in desperation. "Bring us in," she said. The Malthari escorts opened fire first. Streams of purple, white energy lanced across the void, their crystalline projectiles shimmering like falling stars. The Revenant's point, defense turrets roared to life, shredding the incoming volley with contemptuous ease. Malvar's crest of sensory spines stiffened. The humans weren't just evading. They were counting shots. Every missed strike, every wasted salvo. They were learning, adapting. And then the Revenant returned fire, not with the elegant, arcing beams of Malthari weaponry, but with railguns. The projectiles struck like meteors, punching through the first escort's energy shields, as if they weren't even there. The crystalline hull shattered, fracturing into a million glittering shards before the secondary explosions tore the ship apart from within. Thalolan's voice was barely a whisper. Their weapons, they don't just pierce, they shatter. Malvar's throat tightened. The humans had built their guns to break things that weren't meant to break. On the Revenant's bridge, McKay watched the destruction unfold with grim satisfaction. The Malthari ships were beautiful, and beauty, in war, was a weakness. Grogan's voice cut through the chaos. "Prepare boarding pods." McKay hesitated. "Commander, their flagship shields are still." She turned her helmet toward him, the black visor reflecting nothing. "That's why we're not aiming for the hull." The Malthari had never seen anything like the human boarding pods. They didn't land, they impacted, striking not the ship's armored plating, but its delicate sensor arrays, its exposed power conduits, its eyes. The flagship shuddered as the pods detonated, not with explosive force, but with a cascade of electromagnetic pulses. The bridge lights flickered, the holoscreens died, and in that moment of darkness, Malvar realized the humans hadn't just boarded, they had blinded them. The first thing the Malthari heard was the breathing. Then the emergency lighting flared back to life, just in time to illuminate the armored figure stepping onto the bridge. Grogan led them, her rifle held loosely at her side. She didn't aim it, she didn't need to. The Malthari guards raised their energy casters, only for McKay and the others to level their weapons in unison. A silent standoff. Malvar forced himself to stand tall, his spines flaring in defiance. You cannot win this. Grogan tilted her helmet slightly, then she reached up and removed it. The Malthari recoiled, not at her face, but at her eyes, cold, calculating. Thalolan's breath hitched. Every apex species in the galaxy knew that look. It was the gaze of something that had fought its way to the top of the food chain and enjoyed it. Grogan smiled. Just slightly. Funny, she said. I was about to say the same thing to you. And in that moment, Malvar understood the truth. The humans had never been the underdogs. They had just been waiting. Now, the hunt was over. And the Malthari, they were the prey. The chamber was silent, not the quiet of peace, but the stillness before the storm, the breath held before the strike. The Malthari guards stood frozen, their energy casters humming with restrained power. Thalolan's fingers twitched near the controls of the atmospheric condensers, his mind racing through calculations, probabilities, escape routes. None of them led anywhere safe. Malvar's spines remained rigid, but his pulse betrayed him. The human commander's face was bare now, her helmet cradled in the crook of her arm like some ancient warrior's trophy. And her eyes, they were wrong. Not the shape, not the color, the depth. Every apex species in the galaxy had evolved under the same brutal truth. Dominance was not just about strength, it was about hunger, the will to take, to consume, to stand atop the corpses of lesser things and smile while doing it. The Malthari knew that gaze, the Vorath knew it, the Kathsora, the Yriks, even the ancient Near, mythic Siller, all of them recognized it in their own reflections, but never in another. Grogan didn't move. She didn't need to. The weight of her presence alone pressed against the chamber like a gravity. Well, bending the air, distorting reason, the Malthari had come here expecting to dictate terms to a broken species, to force humanity into submission with the threat of superior firepower, of cold logic, of inevitability. They had not accounted for this. McKay and the other human soldiers stood like statues, their weapons unwavering. There was no tension in their stances, no hesitation. They had done this before, they had won before, and they would do it again. Thalolan's voice was a whisper, barely audible over the hum of the ship's bioluminescent panels. Malvar. The commander didn't respond. His mind was locked in a single, horrifying realization. The humans had never been weak. They had never been lesser. The galaxy had watched them claw their way out of their own wars, had dismissed their primitive weapons, their chaotic politics, their reckless expansion. The Malthari had assumed they were witnessing the flailing of a young, foolish species. But now, standing in the shadow of this woman's gaze, Malvar understood the truth. Humanity had not been struggling, they had been practicing, and now the lesson was over. Grogan exhaled, slow and deliberate, her breath fogging slightly in the chambers, artificially cooled air. Funny, she said again, softer this time, almost amused. You thought you were the hunters. Malvar's throat tightened. The humans had let them believe that. They had let the entire galaxy believe it. Now, the game had changed. Grogan took a single step forward. The Malthari guards flinched. She didn't raise her weapon. She didn't need to. You came here to dictate terms, she said, to tell us our place in your order. Another step. Thalolan's fingers curled into fists. But you made one mistake. Malvar's pulse hammered in his veins. You assumed we'd follow them. McKay's rifle shifted, ever so slightly. The Malthari guards tensed. Grogan didn't even glance at them. She was still watching Malvar, still smiling, and in that moment, the alien commander understood the true horror of humanity. It wasn't their weapons, it wasn't their ships, their armor, their terrifying, relentless adaptability. It was the certainty in their eyes, the absolute, unshakable knowledge that they would win, because they always had, because they always would. Malvar's spines flattened against his back. The hunt was over, and the Malthari. They had never been the predators. They were the prey, and the humans. They were something worse. Something the galaxy had never. Something new. Grogan tilted her head. Just slightly. Now, she said, her voice calm, steady, inevitable. Let's talk. And for the first time in Malthari history, they obeyed. The command chamber was silent. Not the silence of tension. Not the quiet before violence. But the hollow, ringing quiet of a paradigm shattered. Malvar's claws flexed against the smooth, crystalline surface of the tactical display. The bioluminescent glow of Malthari systems pulsed around them, casting shifting violet shadows across the faces of his officers. Their spines were still flattened, their eyes, wide, unblinking, flicked between the humans and their commander. They were waiting, for orders, for direction, for permission to accept what had just happened. Malvar exhaled, slow and controlled. The air tasted metallic. His blood was still running cold, his instincts screaming at him to fight, to resist, to claw back control from these creatures who had so effortlessly dismantled his understanding of the universe. But he couldn't, because Grogan was still watching him, and her smile hadn't changed. She didn't gloat, didn't posture, didn't need to. She simply knew, and so did he. The Malthari had spent cycles studying humanity. Their wars, their politics, their fractured, chaotic rise from a single world to the stars. They had dismissed them as reckless, unstable, because humanity's greatest weapon had never been their ships or their guns. It was their refusal to break. It was the way they looked at the impossible and laughed. It was the way they stood here now, in the heart of Malthari power, outnumbered, outgunned, and utterly, terrifyingly in control. Malvar's mandibles twitched. Then, with deliberate precision, he lowered himself into the command throne. A gesture of submission, a gesture of respect. Grogan's smile softened. Just slightly, not in pity, not in triumph, in understanding. She stepped forward, her boots clicking against the crystalline floor. Good, she said. And then, as if it were the simplest thing in the universe, she sat across from him. Not as a conqueror, not as a prisoner. As an equal, the Malthari officers stared. The humans did not. They had expected this. They had planned for this, because that was what humans did. Malvar exhaled again, and then, for the first time in his life, he listened. The galaxy would never be the same.